This racing team is held to a almost religious standard in their home country. They love red, they love horses. This is the most successful F1 team of all time, except for the last 15 years. This is the rise, fall, rise again, and now fall again of Scuderia Ferrari. Born in Modena, Italy at the end of the 19th century, Enzo Ferrari grew up watching pre-war Grand Prix racing, which inspired him to become a racing driver himself. Of course, he had to survive the Italian army during World War I and the 1918 influenza outbreak, but he did eventually get a test driving job for a small manufacturer called CMN, and they gave him a seat on their racing team in 1919, and he came fourth in his class at his debut hill climb race. A year later, his talents got him a seat at Alfa Romeo, and he turned that into his first win at the Savio circuit in 1923. He scored 10 more wins in his career, but a series of driver fatalities and his son being born in 1932 convinced him to step off of the track and into the management office. He formed his own racing team inside Alfa Romeo called Scuderia Ferrari in 1929, and despite bearing Enzo's name and his own emblem, the prancing horse designed by World War I Italian ace Francesco Baccara, it was Alfa Romeo's factory team with legendary drivers like Tazio Nuvolari in the iconic P3. Alfa supported Enzo until the Depression in 1933, however he was saved at the last minute when support from Pirelli brought them back. And Enzo was very happy for that, not just because it kept the team afloat, but because it gave Nuvolari his greatest ever drive. The 1935 German Grand Prix held at the infamous Nürburgring, where it wasn't just more dangerous than it is today, it was a promotional tool for the Nazis. Hitler gave blank checks to Mercedes and Auto Union to win with the best German drivers possible. Apparently, it was north of 250,000 Reichsmarks per year 1935 money. I don't know what that is today, because I don't feel like converting Reichsmarks to Deutschmarks and then to the American dollar. So we're just going to move on, saying that it was a lot of money. Therefore, the Germans were making 375 horsepower compared to the Alfa Romeo's 265. But the Italians had better drivers, as the two Alfas locked out the front row in qualifying, and then immediately crashed or fell down to 5th on the start. Nuvolari fell down to 5th, by the way. And to make matters worse for him, his pit stop was atrocious, as his car had to be refueled by hand as the pump broke. He lost 6 minutes to the leaders, but similar to Fangio in 1957, Nuvolari drove by divine willpower and overcame the 6-minute gap to end up second, just 30 seconds down on the leading Mercedes. And Von Braunschnitz had to push his Mercedes so hard to try and keep Nuvolari at bay that he ruined his tires, allowing Nuvolari to overtake and win the race. It was such a shock that the Nazis didn't even have a copy of the Italian national anthem to play at the podium. After the 1935 highs, Enzo and Alfa Romeo's relationship deteriorated, and Alfa took over the entire team in 1937 as Alfa Corsa. Enzo said, "Fine, Dad," and made his own company, Auto Avio Costruzione, which sold racing car parts. They also built a race car, the Tipo 815, which didn't do very well in his first and only season because Italy went to war again in 1940, and Enzo's factory became much less efficient when Allied bombers made a crater. But Enzo did not give up and relaunched his team as Ferrari SPA in 1947, competing in the new Grand Prix and Sports Car Series. The result was the 125S, with a 1.5-liter V12 making 120 horsepower in 1947, and it showed immediately that Ferrari meant business was 4 wins in his debut season, because Ferrari was pretty good, especially at early road rallies, most famously the Mille Miglia, which it won 8 times, including 6 in a row. Unfortunately, Ferrari was also involved in one of racing's first post-Le Mans 55 tragedies, the 1957 Mille Miglia. A Ferrari 335 driven by Alfonso de Portago crashed 40 miles from the finish line. On top of the driver and co-driver, 10 people were killed, 5 of them children, a further 20 were injured. This, combined with 46 other fatalities in the event's history, led to the Mille Miglia being cancelled once and for all that same year. In fact, Enzo, his team, and the tire manufacturer that built the blown-out tire were all sued for manslaughter per Italian rules, but were acquitted in 1961. In much better news, Ferrari was very good in France. They won the 24 Hours of Le Mans on their first attempt in 1949, and when the World Sports Car Championship was introduced in 1953, Ferrari became truly unstoppable. They won in 1954, 1958, and then 5 in a row starting in 1960. Then they pissed off the wrong American, Henry Ford II, who gave Carroll Shelby a blank check to build the GT40, and Ferrari would never win another Le Mans after 1965. And in 1973, Ferrari would leave endurance racing forever. AF Corsa was successful with the 458 and the 488, but Scuderia is not heading back to Le Mans until 2023 with the new hypercar regulations. Which begs the question, why did Ferrari leave sports car racing for 50 years, right during the crescendo of the Porsche-Ferrari war? Simple. Formula One. So let's backtrack a bit. The recently created FIA unveiled a recently created global racing series, Formulas 1, 2, and 3, with 1 being the highest of highs. And Enzo wanted in, but his way, of course. You see, Ferrari actually missed the first ever F1 race in Britain, where Enzo boycotted it over starting money paid to entrants, and Ferrari getting angry is going to be a bit of a theme going forth, so just keep that in mind. Now remember, this was a time without the Constructors' title and without multi-year contracts, so if you wanted a good driver, you had to earn it every year. And Ferrari did not start out on the right foot, with Alberto Ascari finishing 5th in their first season, and it was better their second year. They were a championship contender, with Ascari second to Fangio, but then things got really good. Thanks to Alfa Romeo, ironically. See, they left Formula One after 1951, and apparently most of the other privateer teams are using privateer Alfa Romeos. And with no Alfa Romeo, there were physically not enough F1 cars for the F1 season. So Formula 1 ran Formula 2 regulations. Yeah. And you thought modern FIA planning was bad. Luckily, Ferrari had a brilliant Formula 2 car called the 500, which allowed Ascari to win every single race of the season Ferrari contested, except for the Swiss Grand Prix, which was won by his teammates. Ascari won by an enormous margin and took Scuderia's first Drivers' Championship. The 1953 season, again, used F2 rules, which meant Ascari became Formula One's first double world champion. The next year, F1 actually started using F1 regulations for a change, which is nice, which opened the door for Mercedes and Fangio to sweep back-to-back titles in 54 and 55. And then they quit, not to be seen again until 2010, which led Fangio to Ferrari, and Ferrari had a new old weapon, the Lancia D50 from 1955. It wasn't very good that season, but Enzo bought it and turned it into a true winner. Fangio took his 4th championship by winning 3 races that season, and then moved on to Maserati for a 5th title because Ferrari treated him worse than a cog in a machine. Ferrari actually scored the last front-engine Drivers' Championship in 1958, but the British were coming with an engine in the wrong place. Cooper's mid-engine masterpiece put Enzo in his place, and despite his public arrogance, he knew that the garagistas had cracked the code. And so, the 156 was built. The mid-engine, 1.5-liter V6 made 188 horsepower and nearly 10,000 RPM, and the American Phil Hill drove the 156 to drivers and constructors' titles. Nicely done, Ferrari! Then disaster struck. Enzo's authoritarian leadership led Scuderia's management staff, chief engineers, and championship-winning driver to walk out of the company in 1962 to form ATS. But Enzo would get the last laugh because the remnants of Ferrari reorganized into a streamlined fighting machine on maximum efficiency, which built the 250 GTO to dominate sports car racing, and the 178, which won the 1964 F1 championship. Meanwhile, ATS folded after just one season. That would be the high point for the rest of the 60s, because around that time, Ford arrived in more ways than one. We already mentioned that the GT40 ended Ferrari's success at Le Mans, and the new Cosworth DFV V8 turned F1 on its head. It was light, cheap, fast, reliable, and moldable onto any chassis. It was the perfect engine. DFV-powered cars won every single race in 1969 and took every single championship between 1968 and 1974. It's still the most successful engine in the history of F1 nearly 60 years later. I mean, nobody could touch the Cosworth-powered teams until Ferrari hired a BRM pay driver named Niki Lauda. Lauda wasn't just a brilliant driver, but also an excellent developer, working hand-in-hand with the engineers to make the perfect car. Lauda told Enzo to his face that his car sucked. It may very well have been the first time Il Commodore had ever been told off, but he knew Lauda was right and said if he could keep his job if he made the car half a second faster. And since Lauda went on to race for Ferrari, given at the very least that Ron Howard movie from 2013, he made it 0.8 of a second faster and got to keep his job. And the car started winning. Ferrari won 3 races that year with Clay Regazzoni losing the title by just 2 points. But Lauda was now in full control of his car and easily took next year's title with 5 race wins, Ferrari's first championships in 11 years. And then Ferrari got caught up in the most dramatic championship in F1 history, i.e. that movie I just referenced. Lauda's flatmate, James Hunt, was with McLaren, and proved to be an equal to the Austrian. Hunt actually got more pole positions than Lauda, however, Lauda still took a massive 50-point lead in the championship by Monaco. But then Hunt's fortunes changed. His win in Spain was reinstated, and Lauda would suddenly stop scoring points for a while. A horrific accident happened to him at the Nürburgring, which saw him put in the hospital for severe burns and lung damage. Ferrari actually hired Carlos Ritterman that same day, remember, cogging the machine and all. But it turns out that was largely unnecessary, since Lauda hit the track again just 42 days after being given last rites. He only missed 2 races that season, and finished a remarkable 4th place at Monza ahead of his replacement. It all came to a head in Japan, where a downpour convinced Lauda that his second title wasn't worth the risk, and Lauda retired with a few other drivers. Hunt was not one of them, and pulled off a masterful wet weather drive to finish 3rd, winning the championship by 1 point, with Ferrari getting a consolation constructors title. But that didn't seem to matter. Lauda's decision to essentially give away the championship in many people's eyes distanced himself from the rest of Ferrari, and the internal politics pushed him further and further. He won a second championship in 1977 pretty easily, despite winning 3 races to Mario Andretti's 4. But regardless of his success, Ferrari hated him for 1976, and he left for Brabham. Ferrari would continue winning, scooping up the 1979 titles as a last hurrah, before things went so south Enzo would never see a Ferrari driver crowned again. Now, I would say that Williams beat Ferrari with their ground effect FW07, but truth be told, everybody beat Ferrari in 1980. Not only did they fail to score a single win, they scored just 8 points that season, with Jody Scheckter failing to qualify in Canada. The 312 T5 was a slow, unreliable disaster that broke down more times than it scored points. But the 1982 126C was a return to form, and a championship contender once again for Ferrari, and they would take the Constructors' title back-to-back. However, unfortunately, Ferrari's internal politics made the team cry quite literally, as a fierce inter-team rivalry between Gilles Villeneuve and Patrick Tambay got into several spats over team orders. The result was Villeneuve dying in a crash at Belgium and Tambay suffering a career-ending injury in Germany. The 1983 Constructors' title would be the last Enzo ever saw, as McLaren's stranglehold arrived in full force for 1984, and Enzo died at the age of 90 in 1988. Not that Enzo's death affected the team's policy of, shall we say, persuasion. Let me explain. The new 1989 engine rules were going to only use 3.5-liter V10s, and Ferrari wanted a V12, so they threw a little hissy fit. They pressured the FIA so much, even going as far as to build a 637 Indy car, threatening to leave F1 if they couldn't have their V12s. Some call that lobbying, others call it coercion, but it's semantics because it worked, and Ferrari got to keep their V12s. And they got a big break in 1990 besides the new V12 engine, when they signed three-time world champion Alain Prost as Nigel Mansell's teammate. And it served as the culmination of the bitter Senna versus Prost rivalry. The two of them scored 11 out of 16 races that season, and at the penultimate round in Japan, Senna got his revenge for 1989 and intentionally crashed Prost off the track, securing both championships for McLaren in one of the most controversial finishes of all time. The 1991 season was less so, as Alain Prost failed to win a single race. The 643 was the result of Ferrari mismanagement, and when Prost pointed this out, he was promptly fired from Ferrari before the end of the season. Yikes. But the darkest night is just before the dawn, and Ferrari lured double world champion Michael Schumacher from Benetton to their team, and with Schumacher came Ross Brawn. So we had the Benetton personnel combined with John Todt, and they began to do something nobody thought possible. De-Ferrari Ferrari. Gone were the incompetent management strategies of old, and in was a well-oiled machine of Todt and Brawn, with a damn fast driver to boot. A driver that was still emotional sometimes, though. The 1997 season was Ferrari's first title fight in 7 years, and it came down to the wire between Jacques Villeneuve at Williams and Schumacher. Schumacher was leading by a single point heading the 1997 European Grand Prix, and decided to follow the Senna versus Prost school of racing, and intentionally turned into Villeneuve in a similar manner to 1994, where he destroyed Damon Hill's suspension, giving him the championship. But this is 1997, and lightning does not always strike twice, because he missed. And Schumacher DNF'd while Villeneuve survived to take the title by finishing third. But again, this was not the FIA of old, and Schumacher was disqualified from the entire championship. Granted, this all seemed like nothing more than a little speed bump in the scheme of things, as Williams and Villeneuve would never challenge again, but Ferrari, oh, they were just getting started. After close-fought battles, McLaren earned Ferrari the 1999 Constructors' title. Schumacher never let up. Another well-fought season in 2000 ultimately led to Schumacher and Häkkinen in a straight fight for the championship in the final race, and this time Schumacher didn't crash into him, and they won both titles. And from that point on, the steamroller just kept on going. In every race he finished, Schumacher either came first or second, except in Italy, where he fell down to a pathetic fourth. He obliterated the 2001 championship and proceeded to do so for the next 3 years. Ferrari won 46 races, 38 of them with Schumacher behind the wheel. That is a 56% win rate for Schumacher alone across all of the seasons. That is an insane number. The F2004 is among the most successful racing cars in history, thanks to its 920 horsepower, 19,000 RPM V8. The F04 was actually faster than the 2019 F1 cars at Monza and Shanghai without slicks, because F1 cars did not run slicks back then. It gave Schumacher his 7th World Championship and Ferrari their 14th Constructors' title. It was also the automotive weapon for one of the greatest pieces of strategy in motor racing history. God, that sounds nice. I wish we could do that nowadays. Despite the FO4's onslaught, Renault wanted to win their home Grand Prix in 2004, and in France, Renault actually had the advantage. You see, back then there was not one universal tire supplier, and Renault's Michelins were faster at getting up to race pace than Ferrari's Bridgestones. Adding on to this was the track surface, which chewed up tires very quickly, favoring tires that got up to speed faster. Both of those things meant that Ferrari was slower than Renault in terms of race pace. They were faster at the end of each stint for sure when the tires got up to temperature, but that really didn't matter because the French surface ate up the tires too quickly. So if they wanted to beat Renault at their home Grand Prix, they would have to do so on strategy alone. Schumacher got second in qualifying after Fernando Alonso's Renault, and the two ran off into the distance because it's Fernando Alonso and Michael Schumacher. And this is where things started to get interesting. On lap 11, Ferrari pitted Schumacher, and Alonso covered it 3 laps later. Schumacher made his way up to second place, 3 seconds behind Alonso, and pitted again on lap 29, this time giving himself just 9 laps of fuel. Yeah, you could pit for fuel back then. I mean, that's something we don't do anymore. But yeah, you would pit for fuel. Now Renault again followed suit, giving Alonso 14 laps of fuel for a 3-stop strategy. And with that, Ferrari's masterclass was all but sealed. See, what Renault didn't realize is that they weren't on a 3-stop strategy. They were on a 4. And when he overtook Alonso in the pits for the lead, he could exploit the sheer speed of the FO4 and pull out a 5.5 second gap. Alonso took the lead back on Ferrari's lap 42 stop, but Renault was again surprised that Ferrari underfueled the car again. And now with a light car and another Renault stop to go, all Schumacher had to do was make lap pace as consistently as possible. If he was 25 seconds clear of Alonso, it would cover his 4th stop without the need for an overtake. And spoiler alert, it did. And Schumacher won the French Grand Prix on a 4-pit stop strategy without a safety car. It was arguably the crowning achievement of the Brawn era and a microcosm of just how good the trio of Brawn, Schumacher, and Todt had made Ferrari. Then Schumacher retired and Ross Brawn went to Honda, so Todt turned to the only man that nearly beat Schumacher, Kimi Räikkönen. Despite a horrifically unreliable McLaren, Räikkönen only lost the 2003 title by 2 points. And the 2007 season proved to be just as dramatic, with McLaren teammates Alonso and rookie Lewis Hamilton battling each other, and the McLaren infighting allowed Räikkönen to sneak a world championship by 1 point at the final round of the season, securing Scuderia's 30th championship title. And they took the Constructors' title again next year, although Felipe Massa lost the championship by just 1 point on the last corner of the last lap of the last Grand Prix of the season to Hamilton. Then Ferrari sacked Räikkönen at the end of the 2009 season, despite him scoring the team's only win of the season in 2009, and he wasn't the only one. See, Ferrari got into a bit of a civil war as Stefano Domenicali took over from Todt from 2008 to 2014. Not that long of a time, right? Well, we're starting to enter the collapse of the Roman Empire phase, if you will, because there were a lot of team leaders and not a lot of time, because he was replaced by some business guy with a degree in economics, Marco Mattiassi, who lasted a whole season before being replaced by the CEO of a football team, Maurizio Arrivabene. I don't really care enough to pronounce his name correctly. He lasted from 2015 all the way to 2018 until then technical boss Mattia Binotto took over. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Räikkönen's spot was taken by Alonso, who was given some pretty average cars, but Alonso is a pretty above average driver and came back from a 9-race, winless drought to win 4 seasons in the second half of the season. But he just couldn't replicate that success at the finale in Abu Dhabi, and Vettel won by 4 points. Alonso would have another chance during the most competitive season in F1 history. 7 drivers won the first 8 races of the 2012 season, with Alonso taking the lead by Spain. But Vettel came back in the last few races to take the title by just 3 points. Realizing the Germans' talents, Ferrari snatched Vettel away from Red Bull in 2015, and he gave them their first win in 34 races before leading Raikkonen to Ferrari's first 1-2 finish at the 2017 Monaco Grand Prix. They were doing good. And that set the stage for 2018. It was the first serious fight Mercedes had in a while. Vettel got 4 wins in the first half of the season and took a thin lead in the championship. But then Germany happened. Vettel was leading when he locked the rears and went straight into the wall. It was a victory that Ferrari could not have afforded to lose. The Hamilton-led 1-2 launched Mercedes into the lead of both championships, and they blitzed the rest of the season. Ferrari could only muster 2 more wins, with Vettel in Belgium and Raikkonen winning the Austin Grand Prix, a record 5,691 days after his first win. Ferrari were desperate. That was their best attempt in 6 years for a title, and they blew it. And to make matters worse, the 2019 season proved to be a Mercedes cakewalk, winning the first 8 races in a row. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and after the summer break, the next 2 tracks were high-speed focused, and Ferrari was fast. Over a second per lap advantage just based off of power on the straightaways, and it worked. Leclerc and Vettel won 3 races in a row, and Red Bull became suspicious. So they asked for a clarification on the rules, on whether or not bypassing the FIA fuel flow sensor rates was cheating. The FIA said that it was, and an investigation was held into Ferrari's engine. But amazingly, the results were not disclosed to the public, provided that Ferrari pay an undisclosed settlement and agree to help the FIA in future fuel flow monitoring. What a fun coincidence. But regardless of whether they did or did do it, Ferrari fell off a cliff. The SF1000 was built to honor Ferrari's 1000th Grand Prix entry, but there was nothing to celebrate. GPS estimates show that the 1000 was up to 65 horsepower down compared to the SF90, and considering the only thing making the 90 competitive was its engine, the 2020 car was a hot mess. Mediocre aero, a mediocre chassis, and now a mediocre engine to top it off. Granted, Leclerc is a fantastic driver and managed to somehow get 2 podium finishes out of the thing, but as a whole, it was Ferrari's worst season since 1980. Leclerc could only muster 8th in the championship, with Ferrari being relegated to 6th, behind Racing Point and Renault. I guess cheaters don't prosper after all. Ferrari's 2021 season was better purely by consistency, as again, Leclerc managed to squeeze 5 podiums out of a solidly average car. But then the new regulations hit in 2020, and they brought about a new Scuderia. At the season opener in Bahrain, Leclerc led Ferrari to a 1-2 finish, with both Red Bulls DNFing and the Mercedes empire crumbling to the ground with a poor car. They followed that up with a 2-3 in Saudi Arabia after a close-fought battle with Red Bull, and then another Leclerc win in Australia. So heading into the 4th round of the season, Max wasn't even in the top 5, and Red Bull had half of Ferrari's score. And the next race was home turf at Imola. And then Ferrari started to remember who they were. Sainz got crashed into on lap 1, and Leclerc damaged his car on the curb, finishing 6th. But those were individual driver mistakes, nothing that Ferrari could have done. And they remedied it in Miami, finishing 2nd and 3rd. And then Leclerc's engine blew up in Spain. But hey, with both Ferraris on the front row at Monaco, it was an easy 1-2 finish on the most difficult track to overtake on in the world. Until Ferrari's strategist did a stupid double-stack pit strategy, which allowed Red Bull to overcut them and score a 1-3. Then Leclerc's engine exploded again in Baku, an engine penalty that dropped him to 19th on the grid in Canada, where he had to fight hard back to 5th. With his pace, he should have won that race if not for the engine penalty. And then, to make matters even worse for poor Leclerc, Ferrari strategist hung him out to dry on old tires during a safety car at Silverstone. Sainz won, but Leclerc was relegated to 4th. As their championship leader, he was losing that lead rapidly. Leclerc finally won again in Austria, despite his car actively trying to commit suicide, but don't worry, just 1 race later he spun into a wall on his own in France. And just to make matters even worse, as if things could not possibly get worse than they already were. Ferrari put Leclerc in hards in Hungary, which plummeted him down the order so fast they pitted him for a third time for soft compound tires. That pushed him down to 6th. And the mistakes only get more pathetically comical from there. Nobody had the pace of Red Bull at Spa, not even close. But they could still get some solid points, and Leclerc was running P5 with just 2 laps to go. And then they decided to be a bit daft and pit him for the bonus point of fastest lap. Unfortunately, they forgot that Alonso was also, racing them. And he overtook him in the pits, which meant Leclerc wasted his flying lap overtaking Alonso. And to add insult to injury, he got a 5-second time penalty for speeding during the unnecessary pit stop, dropping him to an unnecessary P6. They tried to get 1 bonus point and end up losing 2. Nicely done. And even more stupid than that, Ferrari literally forgot that F1 cars have 4 wheels during Sainz's pit stop at Zandvoort. Yeah. And even when they don't act like complete idiots, they have rotten luck. Like at Monza, where the FIA actually bothered to follow the rules this year and finish under a safety car, guaranteeing Leclerc a 2nd place behind Verstappen. Reminder, at the checkered flag in Australia, Ferrari had a 49-point constructors lead and a 46-point drivers lead, with a very fast car and very talented drivers. At the time of recording this right now, they have converted that into a 116-point drivers' title deficit and a 139-point constructors' title deficit. It's not mathematically impossible for Ferrari to claw it back, but some serious Ferrari international assistance would be required, especially because Mercedes seems to have fixed their car up nice and proper, and we will probably have 3-team battles for the remainder of the season, and that would mean that multiple drivers have a chance of winning races. And if that happens, Red Bull would take it based on their points advantage. So Ferrari blew it. Again. The only possible overarching reason for all of this is management. Mario Binotto is the team principal, and if you're in that position, the line ends with you. The team screws up because you screwed up. And given Ferrari's horrific strategy calls and a fast but unreliable engine, you can't help but think that he is the cause of all of this. But as you've seen over the course of this video, this isn't necessarily surprising for Ferrari. It's exceptional how many comical failures there have been in such a short period of time, but it's not necessarily unexpected. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Out of all the Formula 1 champions who joined Ferrari after winning their title, only 2 would win again: Fangio and Schumacher. It's a very strange issue that Ferrari is having. Their cars are fast, their drivers are championship quality, their qualifying sessions consistently put them on the front row, and yet they're sinking like they're wearing cement shoes. It is now mathematically possible for Max Verstappen to win this championship with 5 races left to go. The best way I can describe this is a tragically relevant quote about Ferrari. When you go to Ferrari and you see the facilities, the test track, and everything else, you wonder how they ever managed to lose a race. Then over time you see the politics and intrigue, and you ever wonder how they managed to win one.